There's a specific kind of quiet that only shows up when it starts snowing at night. People like to call it peaceful, but that's not really accurate. It's more like everything gets muted at once, like the world decided to lower its volume without warning. I've never been the type to go wandering outside for no reason. I like warmth, you like walls. But real snow, the kind that shows up unannounced, does something to me. It feels temporary, like if you don't step into it when it happens, you've missed your chance. That night, it wasn't even supposed to snow. I know that for a fact because I check the weather constantly during winter. Obsessively, if I'm being honest. That evening, I was sitting in my room reading when I noticed the light outside looked off. Brighter than it should have been. When I looked out the window, the ground was already white. Not lightly dusted covered. It bothered me how fast it happened. One moment, nothing. The next, everything. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the snow fall hard and steady, until the thought hit me that I should go out before it stopped. I didn't really debate it. I grabbed my coat, pulled on my boots, and drove to a nearby trail I knew wouldn't have anyone around. It's not deep wilderness, but once you're a few minutes in, it might as well be. I parked, shut the car door, and immediately felt how cold it was. The kind of cold that creeps in instead of hitting you all at once. Snowflakes drifted through my headlights, then vanished into the dark. After a few seconds, I started walking. The trail swallowed sound quickly. My footsteps were the only thing I could hear, and even those felt dull, like the snow was trying to erase them as I went. I walked longer than I intended to, not really keeping track of time. Eventually I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. I just did. That's when I heard something that didn't belong. At first I thought it was my imagination catching up with me, my brain filling in gaps because of how quiet it was. Then I heard it again. A voice. Small. Too small. Hi. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. The word didn't make sense out there, and my brain stalled trying to place it. The sound didn't come from one direction either. It felt scattered, like it had bounced off the trees before reaching me. I turned slowly, scanning the trail. Nothing. I told myself to leave. I actually started to turn back when the voice spoke again. Closer this time, almost playful. Up here. I looked up without thinking. There was a child sitting on a tree branch above me, and the calm I felt seeing him vanished almost instantly. Because once I stepped closer, something stood out that made my stomach tighten. No tracks. No signs anyone had walked there at all. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. I stood there staring up at him, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, while he just sat on the branch like this was the most normal place in the world to be. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. He was bundled up in a winter jacket and a knit hat pulled low over his ears. His legs dangling freely as snow collected on his boots. Seeing him should have made me feel better. It almost did. At least now I knew what the voice belonged to. At least it wasn't just something unseen calling out to me from the dark. But that relief didn't last long. The longer I looked, the more wrong the situation felt. The tree itself was tall and straight, its trunk smooth and bare until the branches started far above my head. The branch he was sitting on was easily 20 feet up. I tilted my head back further, trying to figure out how he could be climbed it, but there was no obvious answer. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding thinner than I expected. "What are you doing up there?" He smiled. It was a wide smile, stretched a little too far, like he was copying something he'd seen before, rather than doing it naturally. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted slightly on the branch, causing a small shower of snow to fall around him. "I'm sitting," he said finally, like I'd asked a stupid question. That didn't help. I took a few cautious steps closer, my eyes flicking between him and the ground around the tree. The snow was still pristine. No scuffed patches, no drag marks, no broken crust where someone might have scrambled up in a hurry. "How'd you get up there?" I asked. He shrugged, the motion casual, almost lazy. "It's a secret." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Not playful, not misibos flat. Like the answer didn't really matter. I considered telling him to come down. I've considered asking where his parents were. I considered a lot of things. None of them came out of my mouth. Standing there beneath him, I felt oddly exposed, like I was the one out of place. The boy leaned forward slightly, peering down at me with that same fixed grin. "Watch this," he said. Before I could react, before I could even process what he meant, he stood up. For a split second, he balanced there on the branch, arms loose at his sides. Then he leaned backward and disappeared from my view. My brain lagged behind reality. I remember shouting, but I don't remember deciding to. I rushed forward just in time to see him hit the ground hard, landing flat on his back with a dull, sickening sound that cut through the quiet. There was no scream, no movement. My heart was pounding as I ran toward him, already bracing myself for what I was about to see. I was a few steps away when he sat straight up and stood. Then, without looking at me, he turned and sprinted into the trees. I froze, because before he vanished into the darkness, I saw the snow beneath him on for just a moment. It looked like even his fall hadn't left the mark it should have, and that was when I realized I was no longer alone on the trail. For a moment I just stood there, staring at the space where he disappeared. My brain kept replaying the fall over and over again, like it was trying to correct a mistake. People don't fall like that and get back up. Kids definitely don't. I knew that. I felt that in my chest. The same way you feel something is wrong before you can explain why. I should have turned around. That was the thought repeating in my head as I finally moved. Not chased. Him just moved. My legs felt stiff, heavy, like they didn't fully belong to me anymore. I told myself I was only going to walk back to my car, that whatever I'd just seen wasn't something I needed to understand. Then I noticed the footprints. They were small, barely deep. Too neat. They cut straight off the trail and into the trees, heading in the same direction he'd run. The snow was still falling, but not fast enough to have erased them yet. That detail stuck with me more than it should have. If the snow could keep his tracks intact, why hadn't it done the same near the tree? I followed them before I consciously decided to. At first, I told myself I was just making sure the kid was okay, that he might be hurt, or lost, or scared. It was a lie, but it was a comfortable one. The truth was uglier. I didn't want to be alone with what I'd just seen. The trees closed in quickly. The trail disappeared behind me, swallowed by darkness and falling snow. My breathing sounded loud in my ears, uneven. Every few steps, I stopped and listened, half expecting to hear someone calling out. Instead, I heard laughter. It came from somewhere ahead of me, high-pitched, breathless, wrong. Not the kind of laugh you hear when someone's genuinely amused. It sounded forced, almost strained, like it was being dragged out of a throat that wasn't built for it. "Hey!" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice shook, and the sound died quickly among the trees. "You shouldn't be out here." The laughter stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like the woods were leaning in. I took another step forward, then another, keeping my eyes locked on the footprints. They weaved between trees now, circling, doubling back slightly before continuing on. He was messing with me, that much was clear. As I passed a thick oak, something slammed into my back. I didn't have time to react. My feet went out from under me, and I hit the ground hard. The breath knocked clean out of my lungs. Before I could even roll over, weight pressed down on my shoulders. Hands clawed at my neck. I screamed and thrashed. My gloves slicked with snow as I tried to grab hold of him. He was lighter than I expected, but stronger than he should have been, his nails digging into my skin with frantic intensity. I caught a glimpse of his face too close no end. The grin was gone. His mouth was open, but what came out wasn't laughter anymore. I managed to twist, throwing my weight sideways. He lost his grip just long enough for me to shove him off. He hit the ground, rolled once, then scrambled back to his feet. And before I could get up, he ran again deeper, this time, laughing. I stayed where I was, gasping for air, my neck burning where he'd torn into Italiano. That's when I felt the warmth spreading beneath my collar, and realized I was bleeding more than I thought. The cold didn't register right away. What I noticed first was how slippery my hands felt when I pressed them against my neck. I pulled them back instinctively, and even in the low light I could see how dark they were against the snow. That's when the pain finally caught up sharp, burning, pulsing, in time with my heartbeat. I staggered to my feet, dizzy, my vision narrowing at the edges. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. They felt unsteady, like they might fold if I pushed them too hard. I forced myself to breathe. The woods were quiet again. Too quiet. No laughter. No movement. Just the faint hiss of snow continuing to fall, already starting to soften the edges of everything that had just happened. I wrapped my scarf tight around my neck, pressing it hard against the cuts. The fabric soaked through faster than I liked, but it was all I had. I told myself the bleeding would slow. It had to. Getting back to the trail felt impossible, but I started moving anyway. Slowly at first, then a little faster once I found my footing. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there between the trees, watching me. Nothing. The farther I went, the more disoriented I felt. The trees all looked the same now, dark shapes against white ground. I couldn't tell if I was heading back the way I'd come or drifting deeper into the woods. Panic crept in around the edges of my thoughts, making it hard to focus. At some point, I fell. Not hard, just enough to knock the air out of me again. I lay there longer than I should have, staring up at the branches overhead as snow collected on my eyelashes. For a terrifying moment, I considered staying there, letting the cold take over. It would have been easier. A distant sound snapped me out of its serenity and faint, but unmistakable. Relief hit me so hard it almost hurt. I didn't remember calling anyone. I didn't remember dialing for help at all, but I must have. There was no other explanation. I forced myself up and stumbled toward the sound, waving my arms uselessly as if anyone could see me through the trees. The next thing I clearly remember is bright lights cutting through the dark, voices, hands guiding me, someone telling me to sit down, to keep pressure on my neck. The cold faded into the background, replaced by a heavy exhaustion that made it hard to keep my eyes open. I came to briefly in the back of an ambulance. The smell of antiseptic sharp in my nose. A paramedic was asking me questions I couldn't fully process. My answers felt slow, disconnected. Much later, I found myself sitting under harsh fluorescent lights, repeating the same story to different people. Police officers. A medic. Someone taking notes. I told them about the boy. The tree. The fall. The attack. They listened. They nodded. They asked follow-up questions, and then one of them said something that made my stomach drop all over again. They'd followed my footprints from the trail, just mine. There were no signs of anyone else out there, no smaller tracks, no scuffle marks, no second set leading into the woods. According to them, I'd been alone the entire time, and as they explained that, I realized something even worse. No one had asked me where the boy went. Because, as far as they were concerned, there had never been a boy at all. I didn't argue with them at first. I was too tired, too foggy, to push back the way I should have. Every part of me felt heavy, like I was moving through water. They kept talking, explaining things in calm. Measured voices how shock can do strange things to memory. How the dark and the cold can distort perception. I nodded along, even though none of it lined up with what I remembered. I remembered the weight of him on my back. The sound he made when he hit the ground, the sting of his nails tearing into my skin. Those weren't things you imagine. Eventually, they let me go. I don't remember the exact moment I left the hospital, just the feeling of stepping outside into the cold again. The snow had slowed to a light flurry, almost gentle now, like the night was trying to pretend nothing had happened. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile too wide, too practiced. I kept thinking about the footprints, about how clean the snow had been under that tree, about how quickly everything had been erased. A day or two later, I went back. I told myself I just wanted closure, proof, maybe, that something, anything, had been real. The trail looked different in daylight, less imposing, almost ordinary. Fresh snow had fallen since that night, smoothing everything over. I walked the same path, counted my steps without meaning to. When I reached the spot where I thought the tree had been, I hesitated. It took me longer than I expected to find it. The tree was there, exactly where I remembered. Tall, straight, unremarkable. I circled it slowly, scanning the ground, the trunk, the branches overhead. There were no marks on the bark, no broken limbs. Nothing to suggest anyone had ever been up there. Primera looked down. The snow around the base was untouched. No dents. No impressions. No sign a body had hit the ground. That's when I noticed something higher up. Carved into the trunk, shallow but deliberate, were a series of small marks. At first, I thought they were old initials or random scratches. Then I stepped closer and felt my stomach turn. They were handprints. Not big enough to belong to an adult, pressed into the bark at regular intervals, climbing upward in a straight line toward the branches. Too evenly spaced, too high off the ground. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into the tree canopy. And right then, with the woods quiet and empty around me, a thought surfaced that I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. What if the boy hadn't climbed down at all? What if he'd never needed to? Because as I stood there, staring up at those marks, I realized something else. The handprints were fresh, and the snow around the tree hadn't fallen enough to hide them, which meant someone had been there recently. Close enough that I wasn't sure I was alone anymore. I froze where I stood, my breath puffing in short, shaky bursts. The forest that had felt quiet and safe in daylight now seemed oppressive. Every tree a potential hiding place. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but curiosity or something darker kept me rotating. I reached for my phone, only to realize I'd left it in the car. Of course, every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to turn around and get out before I even took another step, but some irrational part wouldn't let me go. The handprints, they weren't random. They traced a path straight up the tree, climbing into branches I couldn't even reach. I pressed my fingers against the bark, feeling the grooves, cold and sharp under my glove. Whoever or whatever had made them, it wasn't natural. Not a human child, not any ordinary animal. I took a tentative step back and heard it then. A soft crunch behind me. Ispunarund nothing. Just the snow settling on the pine needles. I shook my head. My pulse thudded against my ribcage. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was just the wind. But the moment I let myself consider that, I heard it again, a faint Unebin giggle closer. I swallowed hard and took another step backward, trying to tell myself I was overreacting. Ten primeras a dobleo. It movement, in the shadows, just at the edge of my vision. Something small, darting between the trees, and possibly quick. The rational part of me screamed, "Run," but my legs felt like lead. I was frozen by the thought that whatever had been in this forest before wasn't gone. It was still here, watching, waiting. Then the voice came again. "Don't go." It wasn't a child's voice this time. It was lighter, but somehow layered, like it was stretching in a way that didn't sound natural. I spun, trying to pinpoint the direction, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. A shiver ran down my spine. My hands went numb, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. And that's when I realized something even worse. The footprints, I hadn't seen any. As I approached the tree, I assumed the snow had covered them. But now, scattered in the powder at my feet, were tiny footprints too small for an adult, too deliberate for a random animal. They didn't lead away from me. They circled, weaving closer and closer, as though whatever made them had been observing me the whole time. Panic finally overtook me. I turned, sprinting blindly toward the trailhead, my boots slipping in the snow, branches whipping at my face. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees closing in behind me, and then a sound that froze me mid-step. Laughter. Not the faint giggle from before, not playful, full, echoing, layered laughter all around me. And somewhere in that laughter, I knew without looking back that I was not alone.
I ran blindly, letting the snow slow me down without noticing. My legs burned. My legs screamed, but I couldn't stop. Every instinct told me to get out of those woods. Yet a strange part of me wanted to see it, to know what was out there, hiding, watching. The laughter followed me, not constant, but in bursts, echoing off the trees, bouncing around in ways that made it impossible to locate the source. I stumbled over a hidden root, nearly face-planting in the snow, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd lost him, but then it came again, a voice, closer this time. "Here." I froze, my chest heaving. My eyes darted to the shadow between two pines. Nothing visible, just darkness. But I felt him there. I could almost sense the small figure crouched low, watching, waiting. Every instinct in me screamed that if I looked, I'd regret it, but I couldn't help it. I squinted into the gloom. There, just for a second, a small figure darted between the trees. Too fast, too fluid. Not like a child running, not like anything human. My stomach dropped. That fall from the branch, the handprints in the tree, and now this. There was no way it could be real, and yet it was. I thought about calling for help, but my phone was still in the car. Even if I turned back, the trail would feel endless, and the snow had already erased any tracks I might have left. The forest seemed alive now, almost sentient, moving in time with the strange rhythm of that laughter. I ran until I reached the edge of the trail where I'd parked, but my car wasn't comforting. It was just metal in the snow, a fragile barrier between me and whatever was out there. I grabbed the door handle, my hands shaking, and froze. A shadow flickered across the windshield. Small, quick, gone, before I could focus. And then, directly behind me, I heard it, the softest whisper, right in my ear. "Don't leave." I spun around. Empty snow. Just the forest. My pulse was racing, and every hair on my neck stood on end. I realized I had no plan, no rational move. Every option ended with me alone out there. I forced myself to take a step toward the car, then another. Then I saw its footprints in the snow. Only these weren't normal. They weren't human at all. They shifted unpredictably, sometimes tiny, sometimes impossibly wide. They curved around the car and back into the forest, forming a trail that made no sense. And from somewhere deep in the trees, the laughter started again, closer, sharper, like it was circling me. I gripped the car door tighter. My mind screamed to start the engine, to drive, to escape. But the forest had already claimed me. Something was out there, and I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being toyed with, and just as I finally pulled open the door, a small hand touched my shoulder. Cold, firm, real. I screamed.
The hand on my shoulder was cold, so cold it burned through my coat, through my nerves, straight into my chest. I jerked backward, almost tripping over my boots, but when I spun around, there was nothing but the trees, still and silent, blanketed in snow. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. For a second I thought maybe it had been my imagination, my mind trying to cope with the impossible. Then I heard it behind me again, soft, almost a whisper. "Don't leave." I stumbled toward my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Every instinct screamed to start the engine and drive straight into the night. But I paused. Something about that whisper, it didn't feel like a threat. Not exactly. It was impatient, expectant. Like it wanted me to make the choice, and it would judge what I did. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. My breath fogged the window, but I didn't care. I just needed to breathe, to feel safe, even if only for a second. And then I saw it. The footprints, not leading away, but toward the car. Tiny, precise, circling it like a predator, testing its prey. They disappeared just short of the tires, as if whatever had made them was daring me to leave. I revved the engine, slowly, painfully aware that the forest seemed to lean in closer. Listening. The headlights cut through the snow, but they didn't illuminate anything. No child, no shadow, just the trees, endless, and the snow falling like quiet knives. I drove. Slowly at first, because I couldn't see far, because every instinct in my body was telling me to stop. But the laughter followed, faint at first, then growing, echoing from everywhere and nowhere all at once. When I finally broke out of the woods, back onto the main road, the sound stopped. Just like that. Silence. Except for the engine and the crunch of snow under my tires. I dared to glance in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Empty road. Nothing. Chasing me. But the image that stayed with me, the one that haunts every quiet night, wasn't the snow or the trail or the dark woods. It was that grin. Too wide. Too deliberate. Too human. Yet not human at all. I never went back to that trail. Not at night. Not in daylight. I tell people I had a vivid hallucination, that my mind played tricks on me. But deep down I know the truth. Somewhere out there, in the snow and the trees, it's still waiting. And every time I hear the whisper of falling snow, I can't help but wonder if it knows I'm listening.